Welcome to the news for the week of 6 December 2020. We're in December now. New security laws, TCP/IP vulnerabilities, Trickbot, D-Link, the NSA, the IRS, the UDA, or the IRA. All this and Tim Mackey from Synopsys when we come back.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Do you know where your organization's crown jewel data is, whose data it is, what it contains, and if it's flagged, tagged, and classified accurately? Defense In-Depth requires Discovery In-Depth. At Big ID, they help organizations uncover dark data, classify sensitive and regulated data, meet compliance requirements, and take action for data on-prem, in the cloud, and everywhere in between. Learn more about how Discovery In-Depth can change the way enterprise organizations find, classify, and protect sensitive data at securityweekly.com/Big ID.
And yes, that was a Sex Pistol lyric in the intro. It was, so just in case. I did want to remind you that Security Weekly Unlocked is going to happen this Thursday, or Unleashed. It's actually unlocked, but I've been calling it Unleashed. Unleashed, Unlocked, that kind of thing. Thursday, the 10th of December, pretty much all day. There's 3 tracks. We got speakers, they got panels, and in the evening there's like 3 round tables or something. And so it's a full day con in replacement of the holiday party that we usually have, which was a full day con, I guess, but well, whatever. But it's free, so you can get out there. Hosts are going to be on Discord. Speakers will be on Discord, so you can talk in person with everyone if you want to jump on there, or you want to sit through sessions, you want to hear talks or whatever. It's not the same as live on-site Holiday Fest with Security Weekly brand eggnog, but for now, it's going to have to do. Some of us will be here in the studio, so sign up. Let's go to the news. There are a new set of vulnerabilities affecting TCP/IP. CISA reported that 33 vulnerabilities with 4 criticals were found by Forescout. The vulnerabilities are in the IoT area, so this was mostly about IoT stacks that were out there, and they've called them Amnesia 33. I mean, I'm sure there's an office somewhere where they come up with these names, but Amnesia 33, you can probably guess why it's called that. The report says at least 150 different vendors are affected, but they did not provide a list of which vendors they were. There was a limited list that had some things like UIP, Pico, TCP, FNet, NutNet, were all stacks that were named as being affected, but there are others because all of those have been forked repeatedly into other branches, so there's whole piles of different TCP/IP stacks that are being used on IoT devices that are often forked off those original 4 that were used. Some of the vendors have issued patches for this, but there was not a lot in the article about what was going on, except that it was, you guessed it, memory corruption issues, and hence the name. So you can check that out. Trickbot is back. Despite the attempts last month by Microsoft and others to shut down the most commonly used botnet in the world, it is on the rise again. You can't keep a bad thing down. But now it's even better. So it came back, and it's even better than before because it contains a UEFI module. So they started calling it TrickBoot. So if you don't follow hardware much, I mean, I do, but a lot of people don't. UEFI, if you don't know what that is the Windows Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, which is a way that allows you and or your operating system to interact with the BIOS. And so this is very commonly when you boot up the machine, if you go into a UEFI mode, you can actually use that to download updates or do stuff like that. And sometimes these UEFIs will even are accessible when the OS is actually running. So this is a sort of modern kind of approach to that. The interface that's there can allow things to be pushed into the firmware, apparently, using these UEFI attacks, which means that maybe Trickbot may be able to push updates or Trojans or whatever into the firmware that would run at boot time, which means they're going to be really, really hard to detect, because if they're loaded in memory before the system even operating system even starts, it'll be really hard for the operating system and other tools to detect. And then it's really hard to get rid of. Definitely worth a read and a shudder, because if Trickbot can affect your firmware live, there's a lot of implications for what all could be pushed into your firmware. This thing uses the RW Everything tool, which is a read-write everything tool, as a mean of accessing the BIOS via the UEFI. And apparently there's a file called perma-DLL that you might see on the system. So if you're trying to do this, they did say this has not been known to be active in the wild yet, but that it will be. So it's definitely something that's coming soon. D-Link routers were found to have multiple vulnerabilities affecting their VPN products. The DSR 150, 250, 500, and 1000 AC, at very least, are all VPN routers, and if they have firmware version 3.17 or older, they're all affected by this. The attack is, once again, against the web components of this thing. So this has just been this over and over thing we've seen for the last couple of years with these web server tools that are put on routers and firewalls for management purposes. This one's in the Lua library, and it basically is another remote code execution problem. There's another vulnerability. There's actually three of these. So there's a second vulnerability in the Lua CGI, which allows injection of commands as root. So that one's even worse because now you can inject other stuff. And then the third, wait for it, this one's classic, get your old hat out, basically a cron zero attack. If you've never heard of a cron zero attack, that's a really oldie. But basically, cron zero is a daemon in Linux that immediately executes whatever it's handed. So the minute something is passed off to cron, I mean, everybody knows what cron is, but cron zero is sort of a special instance of that. That job executes immediately, and it executes as root. Yay! So patch those D-links. You're going to really enjoy that. The NSA. I told you we're going to get to alphabetic letters here. The NSA issued an alert on Monday which said that Russian-sponsored hackers were actively exploiting the VMware Workspace ONE access, the access connector, and the identity manager and connector exploits that have been going on against the defense sector. So they actually said actively. So that I read that language to mean that they have observed something occurring. Now this is an exploit. This particular VMware exploit requires that the attacker already has to have access to the management interface of the VMware device. And of course, that's usually credential stuffing type attack. So they get that, get in, and then they can run this. So this particular vulnerability then allows remote code execution on the VMware device. They were talking about it being able to extract all the user information from the VMware, all the VMware instances that are running. The vulnerability was rated 7.2 though, so it wasn't rated like 10, oh no, and I'm not sure why. Russia, of course, has denied any involvement in this. The flaw itself is CVE 2020-4006, so you can check that out if you want to read up on that or if you're using VMware devices, especially if you're a defense contractor. A large-scale, say 200 million account attack on Microsoft Office is basically an email spoof. I mean, everybody picked up this story yesterday talking about this, and basically it's a spoofed email that says you have a whole bunch of quarantine messages on your Office 365 system. It was targeted at Office 365 users, but why is it unique? Why did I bring it up? Well, the emails are all from the Microsoft.com domain, so they've spoofed email. And apparently Microsoft can't stop this, so they just get through, and they haven't been able to figure out a way to block this particular attack. Beyond the spoof, it's basically just a phishing attack that directs you to this quarantine page, says, hey, you should check out all these quarantine messages you got, and then you have to log in, of course, and once you log in, it harvests your Microsoft Office credentials. Iron Scales, who reported this attack, had previously reported that over 50% of their phishing emulations bypass the Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection. So basically, keep warning and training your users and get multi-factor in place as soon as you can to try to help slow these things down. The IRS announced this week that it would make ID protection pins available to all taxpayers. You currently have to fill out a request and show that you're at risk for ID theft to get the pin assigned. The tax ID or the tax ID tax refund attack has been going on for a long while. And basically the way that scam works is somebody gets your tax ID number, your social security number, they go to the IRS site, and because there's no multi-factor, there's no anything, they fill out a request to file a tax return with your social security number. And once they do that, it goes through. and then an electronic deposit can be requested for a refund. So obviously they don't file tax returns where you owe a bunch of money. They file them where they're going to get a big refund, and then the refund is made to some account, in the Seychelles Islands or somewhere. And when you go to file your tax return, then you're told that it's already been filed. Then you get to enter into one of those government hell scenarios where you huddle in a dank tiled room with other miserable people clutching stained boxes of papers and crumbling birth certificates in an endless line under flickering fluorescent tubes while you're trying to restore your life and clutching a paper number tag with 666 on it. Not that I ever had that experience or anything, but I know that was kind of vivid, but I think I might have dreamed it. Anyway, the IRS will now, starting in January, provide a one-time PIN to taxpayers in January, and they advise that you should go ahead now and log into their system and create an account so that you'll be on that list. It's an OSINT nightmare of maiden names, family crests, and Raven-delivered scrolls from House Bolton, but you will have to do it because it's the IRS. U.S. President Donald Trump signed the IoT security bill that we've talked about several times into law on the 4th. The long-awaited bill, it was actually originally proposed in the House of Representatives back in 2019, focuses on improving the state of government entities and contractors who are using IoT devices and what kinds of IoT devices can be purchased. Some of this started with like a lot of attacks on Huawei and stuff like that, but basically it's extended into the threat that IoT and IIoT devices pose to government contracts and government defense contractors and so on. The law will require NIST to evaluate IoT devices for security flaws, and it also adds components for reporting. So they did put some stuff in this law about how bugs and bug bounty type things could be done and reported legally. I put this story here because in a minute we want to talk about some of these kind of things. But the new law is called the Internet of Things Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020. And like I said, it was originally called of 2019, but it stalled in the Senate and it was just sort of sitting there. So, it's an interesting thing. I put a link to it. You can go read up on that law before it gets started in January. When we return, Tim Mackey, the principal for security strategy from Synopsys, is going to be on, and that should be cool. So stick around.
Increased attacks, skill gaps, talent shortages, expanding attack surfaces. Cybersecurity and IT teams face these real issues every day. CyberArray for Teams is the #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. CyberArray for Teams makes managing teams easier, guarantees measurable training outcomes, and keeps your team's skills sharp to meet today's biggest security threats. And did you know 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on CyberArray? CyberArray for Teams. Now you know. Visit cyberarray.it/solved to solve your team training challenges.
All right, so today's guest is the principal for security strategy from Synopsys, Tim Mackey. He's going to join me, and we're actually going to talk about the CFAA and the Supreme Court a little bit. Hi, Tim. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Doug. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. That's great. So we were talking yesterday, and you said you were kind of interested in there's a Supreme Court case going through right now. It was actually heard on Monday. Yesterday, I think, where they heard arguments about this. On the CFAA. So the CFAA, if you don't, I'm sure you've heard of it, was the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, was put into law in 1986. And so Tim and I were going to talk about that a little bit. We had a conversation about it yesterday, and we were kind of talking about that. What's your take on this, Tim, about this law?
So I'm actually really happy to see that finally we can get a little bit of clarity around the vagueness in it, because for practical purposes, vagueness does not actually make for a good substitute for understanding of how computer systems work. And if you look at the world of 1986 and you compare it to the world of 2020, there is so much that's changed. And yet this is the law that people are being asked to apply. It's like, how do I actually control and manage authorized access? What does it mean to grant access? What is the scope of work? These are all things that, as researchers, we kind of face on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was around in 1986, and I mean, in 86, I don't think very many people in Washington had much of an understanding about technology, B, any sort of hacking security components of technology, because the few people that probably had worked with anything were probably engineers, and they had worked with these very isolated systems. And 86 was, that was when people were just starting to get PCs in offices, and they weren't networked, they weren't connected. I remember, because 1986 I was working at a bank, and we actually got some IBM PCs in and thought they were a joke and all that kind of stuff. I think the biggest part of the Supreme Court case is about a guy that basically went in and he used his role at a police department to look up some license plates. So something you might have seen in a TV script or something, where the hard-boiled detective comes down to the station and goes, "Come on, you got to help me out here, Benny. Can you look up this plate number for me? Come on, I know it's illegal, but run it anyway." So the guy was looking up plate numbers, and so he was charged. So he was charged with bribery or something, or misuse of police equipment or something like that. And that charge was dismissed later because he had not really violated, I guess, his role. But then they went ahead and charged him under CFAA because they said it was unauthorized access.
Well, it was more a case of exceeding the scope of access that he had. So he had legitimate access to go and look up the license plates or whatever the actual data was. The core challenge was he was not doing it in the performance of his day job. He was kind of caught in a sting and was offered a boatload of money to go and do some of this. And he said, sure. And that's an example of how this plays out. If you look at all of the various comments from the justices, it's clear that there's a gap in how the understanding of computer systems and how computer systems work, even on the judiciary.
Oh, yeah.
And it was one of these laughable bits as you were reading the commentary that there's considerable discussion as to the impact of the word "so." And if you've got that level of vagueness where you're arguing over a 2-letter word, we probably have a problem on our hands.
Well, but that's kind of what the Supreme Court does with lots of stuff, right? There's also, a lot of the cases that go to the Supreme Court are about just these things, like what was this word's intention? What does the Constitution say, and what did they actually mean? Because, it's a vague law. And it says unauthorized access. Does that mean scope, or does it mean Cisco? Cisco's very fanatical in their training about always putting unauthorized access forbidden on all their devices. Because I actually asked in a class once, I was like, why do you always do this? Do you really think that's going to stop anybody? And the guy said, well, it's not to stop them. It's just so that they have acknowledged that they're committing a crime when they go beyond, it's like a no trespassing sign. You walk, you may be shot if you go past this sign. And it's like, well, you were warned. And
to a certain extent, even putting that little warning label, if you look at all the various EULAs that are out there, there's some aspect of thou shalt not reverse engineer, thou shalt not try and do something in a device. So the stories that we saw earlier about the TCP stacks, for example, how would you go and actually investigate what was associated with that particular TCP stack? How would you go and, for example, look at the security of those D-Link routers? Those are some of the real challenges that the CFAA has for itself when it's as vague as it is. So if I go as, for example, a pen tester, and I go and perform a series of activities, and suddenly I'm faced with data from some internal database, have I actually exceeded the authorization that I was given to go and perform that pen test when some flaw within the code actually decided to return to me the entire sales database or something along those lines?
I agree. I think a lot of bug bounty programs and things probably, you click all those EULAs all the time. And I was thinking after we talked about this yesterday, I was thinking about like at some of my jobs, they still have employee agreements that say, for instance, that you won't use your cell phone for anything other than strictly company business. That used to be a big thing. Was your company would give you a cell phone. You're only supposed to use it for business because you're being paid by the minute. And today, most people aren't carrying around 3 or 4 cell phones, but theoretically, you're violating the scope of that user agreement. You're unauthorized access if you're using a cell phone that is not, and of course, a lot of places now you can't use a cell phone, your own cell phone, for company business. So you're back into 2 cell phones. You can only take calls on this one. I mean, I think all those things are problematic. But I mean, I get where they got the law, right? I mean, it was like people were hacking stuff. Movies were coming out about hacking stuff. War games had come out.
Yep.
And, I think I know that when I worked at the bank, I started designing some pen tests and things of bank systems, and those all within scope. But I mean, people were doing that kind of stuff, and it wasn't unusual. I mean, were you around then? I don't know if you were around then.
Yeah, I was definitely around then.
Okay.
I come across my grays quite honestly, and like for the normal person, this is actually something that they can relate to as well. Let's say that someone was brought into their boss's office and was unfortunately told that their job was being made redundant, and that their services were valued, but sorry, we have to let you go. And they have, say, their corporate email on their iPad at home, and because of whatever sequence of events, IT isn't getting around to actually disabling their account. Well, after they've been terminated, they still have a device that's accessing corporate information, and maybe some big boss someplace decides to send out a, hey, this is what our sales were email that now they see. The vagueness of it all could be applied on the research side. It can be applied in normal life as well. So
yeah, I mean,
scoping this will be interesting.
I mean, it's one of those laws that, like, I mean, until there's a lot of case law about it, which there's not, it's not clear what it means, which is why, of course, this has ended up at the Supreme Court, I guess, so that they're going to say this is what it means. And I'm not sure how they make that determination in this case, because it's just like, what is unauthorized access? How do you decide that?
I kind of hope that they send it back and say, we need to remove a little bit of vagueness. But this is the first time that this particular law has actually made it to the Supreme Court. So time will tell.
I mean, yeah, strangely enough, it's the first time that it's actually been in the Supreme Court. I mean, I was surprised by that. I was thinking, when I first saw that story, I was like, what, really? They've never seen a case about, I mean, all these people have been charged under it for hacking and all these kind of things. And yeah, I'm surprised somebody hasn't challenged it and said, what does unauthorized access mean?
But one of the threads of discussion was that there's a lot of state level laws that could apply here. So why is there a need to charge this individual under the CFAA when there's state laws in Georgia that he very clearly was in violation of?
They do that with a lot of stuff, though, right? I mean, I don't think you're not an attorney, and I'm not an attorney, but I mean, they do that a lot with like drug laws and stuff, where there's like state laws against it, there's federal laws against it, and they charge you at the state level, the federal level, the county level, and I mean, I'm asking for a friend, but I mean.
And this may be one of these intended catch-alls, but if we go back to 1986, people didn't really understand what the computer world was going to evolve into, and I don't think that very many people could have predicted what we have today. Yeah, and yet this is the law that's being applied. It's the catch-all, effectively.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know this, but I would suspect that this was one of those things where the FBI was getting really frustrated because they were starting to deal with these cases. People were calling in and saying, "I've been hacked." And they didn't have a division to deal with that. There's no state computer crimes. There's no anything like that. Because I don't know what you would have done in 1986 if your business was compromised. I mean, that your FBI is probably your only alternative. So I would guess somebody at the FBI said, we need a law that we could charge these people under, because like Mitnick was charged with wire fraud and misuse of telephone lines and stuff like that. And it was starting to sound kind of lame when they were charging people with like misuse of telephone lines and stuff like that when they were doing hacks. And I think at least somebody was going, okay, let's just write something that we could charge people under federally. So when we get these calls from Alabama or wherever that at the time did not have state laws, or even an understanding of this stuff, I can't even imagine what would happen if you called like the Colorado State Police in 1986 and said, "I think I've been hacked." I mean, it would have been they would have been like, "With what? Like a machete, an axe?" But I mean, today you're right. They do. Like Rhode Island has laws against there's laws against revenge porn.
And we've got things like the CCPA, the U.S. SHIELD Act. We've got all manner of laws that are around protecting data. And then we have the CFAA. And what's even more interesting to me is that we have the Supreme Court that's going to weigh in on this. And this is another case that they're looking at is Oracle versus Google around the copyrightability of Java APIs. So the Supreme Court justices are now starting to get very much into the tech world in addition to what they traditionally have as their bread and butter.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll reach out to some experts and find out what this all means. I've worked for courts doing that before too, where judges are like, I just need somebody to translate for me. I have no idea what all this stuff means, and I mean it's interesting. Thank you, Tim, for joining me on the news this week. Tim Mackey from Synopsys. We appreciate your insights, and thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Doug. Thank you.
All right. And finally, if you like your vaccine warm and squishy, possibly fake, maybe cut with baby laxative, I don't know, turn to the dark web, like anytime you want things like that. Apparently, sites that are selling the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine have been popping up all over the dark web with pretty high prices, like $1,500, $1,600 US for this stuff. Now, this is the interesting thing. The first thing I thought when I saw the story, I was like, wait a minute, the Pfizer vaccine has got to be kept at minus 70 centigrade. Minus 70 centigrade. That's like what in Fahrenheit? Like minus 90. So it's not an easy temperature to achieve outside of, say, the T-bar at Breckenridge. But I'm sure that these dark web sites shipping an illegal drug illegally to you for anonymous cash are probably going to have, like, refrigeration mechanisms in the envelope that they're shipping through the U.S. mail to you, and it's going to be insured. Yeah, right. Just don't fall for this stuff. Buying doses of anything from a guy named Ricky at Lexington on 125th Street is probably iffy at best, but when it's supposed to be super cold and it is being sold in the dark web, well, I'll leave it to you to decide where you want to spend your hard-earned Bitcoins, but I think I'm going to avoid that for now. And that's the news for now in the time of plague. I'm Doug White. Thanks to Tim Mackey from Synopsys for being here today. Don't forget Unlocked on Thursday, and don't also forget that there's a sucker born every minute. Bye.